Look around you. You vote, you post, you argue in comment sections, you go to protests, but beneath all the noise, who's actually in charge? Who really holds power? And more importantly, who's protected from consequences? There's something we've forgotten, something ancient, something that kept one of the greatest minds in history awake at night. Aristotle didn't fear tyranny the most. No, tyrants are loud. They announce themselves, demand loyalty, rule through fear. But oligarchs? Oligarchs are quiet. They hide behind polished logos, complicated laws, and smiling public statements. They strangle while they smile, and we defend them. Aristotle once wrote, "The true friend of the people should see that the people do not become too poor." It wasn't wealth itself he feared. It was inequality without accountability. Power in hands that never touch the dirt. Decisions made by people who never face the fallout. What did he see that we've chosen to ignore? Let's rewind the tape to the warning we forgot, the mirror we've been too afraid to look into. Most people think government is a simple spectrum. You've got democracy on one side, dictatorship on the other, freedom versus oppression. But Aristotle saw something more complex. He saw government like a living organism, one that can rot from the inside out. And it doesn't do it randomly, it follows patterns, predictable patterns. His political map wasn't a straight line, it was a circle. Monarchy becomes tyranny when kings stop serving the people. Aristocracy turns into oligarchy when merit gives way to greed. And constitutional government, that collapses into mob rule when passion replaces reason. According to Aristotle, every form of government has its own corrupted version when leaders stop ruling for the common good and start ruling for themselves. But it's oligarchy he feared most, not because oligarchs are more brutal, but because they're invisible. They don't take power with armies, they buy it. They don't burn institutions down, they wear them like costumes. They don't need to oppress people, they just convince us to do it to ourselves. Now let's be fair. Our democratic systems have done a lot. Civil rights, labor protections, environmental laws, those weren't nothing. Those were massive wins, fought for and earned. But now, those very rights are being chipped away, quietly, subtly, by the same force Aristotle warned us about, concentrated wealth. Let's get specific. Take Boeing. The company rushed the 737 MAX into production, putting speed and profit ahead of safety. The result? 2 deadly crashes, 300. No executive went to prison. The plane got reapproved. The system shrugged. That's not justice. That's oligarchy in action. Or look at Purdue Pharma. They knew their opioids were addictive. They buried the data. They fueled a crisis that killed over 400,000 Americans. The Sackler family made billions. And when the truth came out, they paid a few fines, no jail time. Their fortune? Mostly intact. Meanwhile, the people who got addicted, they go to jail. They get shamed. The ones suffering get punished. The ones causing the suffering get protected. That's what oligarchy looks like. It's not just being rich. It's using that wealth to wall off power, to shut others out, while still pretending everything is fair. And here's the dark genius of it. Modern oligarchy feels like freedom. We think we're making choices, voting, buying, scrolling. But what if the menu was written long before we walked in? What if the candidates, the jobs, the futures we pick from were all pre-approved by people who already made the real decisions? Aristotle said, "It is more proper that law should govern than any one of the citizens. Law should be fair, impartial, universal." But what happens when law becomes something only the rich can afford, something only the powerful can understand, navigate, and twist? Then justice isn't blind, it's just for sale. And that's when things start to feel truly unsettling. Because at some point, you've got to ask, why do we keep protecting the people who exploit us? Why do we defend a system that seems designed to leave us behind? Why do we scream at each other on social media while quietly bowing to the ones pulling the strings? Let's get into the psychology of it. Because this isn't just about systems or structures. It's about how we think, how we cope, and how we rationalize the very thing that's hurting us. Psychologists John Jost and Mahzarin Banaji ran some eye-opening experiments around something called system justification theory. And here's what they found. People, especially the ones suffering the most, often defend the very system that's hurting them. Sounds insane, right? But think about it. In one study, people living in poverty were more likely than the middle class to justify wealth inequality. The people being crushed the hardest were the ones defending the boot on their neck. Why? Because admitting the system is broken means admitting you're trapped. And that's a brutal truth to carry around. It's easier to believe the stories we've been told. They must have worked harder. They must be smarter. Maybe I'll make it too someday. We trade our rightful anger for the fantasy of inclusion. We accept scraps today for the promise of cake tomorrow. A cake that never shows up. And oligarchs? Oh, they know this psychology perfectly. They don't just hoard wealth, they hijack our imagination. They sell us dreams while quietly pulling out the floorboards beneath us. You've heard it, right? Don't be jealous. Don't be a complainer. Don't be a socialist. Basically, if you question the system, you're the problem. That's the message. Accepting exploitation isn't just normal, it's mature, realistic, patriotic even. But there's an even deeper tactic they've mastered, one straight out of ancient strategy, division. Aristotle wrote, "Tyrants preserve themselves by sowing discord among the people." But oligarchs? They do it even better. They don't need to overtly oppress. They just stir the pot and walk away. Let's break down how this works with a real example. Amazon spent over $4 million on anti-union consultants to stop their warehouse workers in Alabama from organizing. But what did the media focus on? Were the workers being manipulated by outside agitators? That became the story. Meanwhile, Jeff Bezos made $13 billion in one day during the pandemic, while his workers couldn't afford to take a sick day without losing pay. And yet, the public debate wasn't about that obscene imbalance. It was about whether workers deserved $15 an hour. See the trick? If the working class is busy fighting itself, over race, over religion, over who gets what benefits, they'll never unite against the people actually rigging the game. If the middle class is more scared of the poor than they are of the rich, they'll throw their lot in with the oligarchs, hoping to be spared. If workers are kept in competition with each other, instead of solidarity, wages stay low and profits stay high. This isn't some fringe conspiracy theory. This is age-old strategy. Divide and conquer, refined and weaponized. Now, look at the media landscape. Our political discourse. How much of it is just noise designed to keep us at each other's throats? How much time do we spend arguing over symbolic culture wars, while the cost of living quietly crushes us? How often are we debating who deserves healthcare or education or food, while billionaires pay lower tax rates than teachers? And here's what would have terrified Aristotle more than anything: the slow death of the middle class. He believed, the best political community is formed by citizens of the middle class. Why? Because the middle class has balance. They're not rich enough to be corrupted, not poor enough to be desperate. They have skin in the game, and enough security to participate in civic life. They're democracy's immune system. But now, that immune system is failing. According to data from the Economic Policy Institute, productivity has risen 70% since 1979, but wages for typical workers only up 12%. The top 1% now controls a third of all wealth, the bottom 50%, just 2%. College tuition has skyrocketed by 1,200% since 1980. Medical bills are one of the leading causes of bankruptcy. This isn't just capitalism doing its thing. This is engineered extraction, and what happens when the middle class falls into debt, anxiety, and hopelessness. When the poor become desperate, when the rich become untouchable, you don't get revolution. Revolution takes hope. It takes unity. It takes belief that things can get better. What you get instead is something more subtle, more dangerous. You get learned helplessness. Let's talk about learned helplessness. It's one of the most terrifying concepts in psychology, and it explains a lot about how we're feeling right now. The idea comes from a famous experiment by psychologist Martin Seligman. He put dogs in cages and shocked them. At first, they tried to escape, but when they realized there was no way out, they stopped trying. Later, even when escape was possible, they didn't move. They just lay there and took it. Sound familiar? How many people do you know who complain about their job, their debt, the cost of healthcare, but shrug when you ask if they think anything will change? That's not apathy. That's a nervous system stuck in survival mode. That's learned helplessness at a national scale. And that's where modern oligarchy is brilliant. It doesn't need to censor speech, it just owns the platforms. It doesn't need to rig elections, it just funds every viable candidate. It doesn't need to ban information, it just drowns you in noise until you don't know what's true. The most effective prison is the one where you don't even realize you're locked up. In fact, you defend the walls. This is the world Aristotle warned about, not a dictatorship marching through the streets, but a slow rot from within. Not an evil ruler on a throne, but a collapse of virtue across the culture. Because that's where it all starts. When people stop caring about the common good. When leaders put private gain over public service. When the pursuit of wealth becomes the only thing we value. That's how societies fall, not from outside invasion, but from internal erosion. So ask yourself, look at our culture, honestly. What do we admire? What do we reward? What do we teach kids to want? We celebrate wealth, no matter how it's earned. We chase fame, no matter what it's built on. We admire power, no matter how it's used. That's not just a cultural problem. That's a systemic failure of values. And if you want to see how deep it goes, just open your favorite app. Social media doesn't just reflect this decay, it amplifies it. Algorithms reward outrage, not honesty. Spectacle, not substance. Influence, not integrity. We're trained to perform instead of think, to react instead of reflect. In a world where the algorithm decides what matters, virtue has no market value, and without virtue, democracy becomes just another brand, curated, marketed, and sold back to us as engagement. We get to vote, but only between two pre-selected options. We get to speak, but only inside platforms we don't control. We get to debate, but only within the narrow frame of what's considered acceptable. That's not real choice. That's managed perception. And Aristotle knew exactly what would happen next. Once oligarchs take root, they don't let go. They don't voluntarily give up power. He didn't call for revolution or communism. He wasn't anti-wealth. What he wanted was balance, what he called polity, a form of constitutional government rooted in virtue and wide participation, a system where merit mattered more than money, where laws served the public, not private interests, where power was spread out enough to prevent corruption from taking hold. So, what would that look like today? It starts with structure. You can't fight oligarchy with vibes. You need systems that make it impossible to hoard power in the first place. First, get money out of politics. That means overturning Citizens United, passing public campaign financing laws, and making all donations fully transparent. Because right now, elections are auctions. Second, progressive wealth taxes, not to punish success, but to make sure that success doesn't buy democracy. When one person's fortune is bigger than 100 million others combined, they're not just wealthy, they're sovereign. Third, universal civic education. Not just reading the Constitution once in high school. Real training, media literacy, political organizing, how to challenge authority, how to hold power accountable. We don't teach this on purpose, because educated citizens are hard to manipulate. These are the building blocks of modern polity, a structure built on balance, participation, and virtue. But here's the hard truth. Structure isn't enough. We need something deeper. We need a cultural shift, a revival of civic values, a total rethinking of what we admire and why. So what does a cultural shift actually mean? It means redefining success, not just as individual achievement, but as collective well-being. It means asking ourselves, who do we celebrate? Who do we put on magazine covers? Who do we invite onto talk shows? Who gets statues? Who gets silence? Right now, it's billionaires, influencers, tech moguls. We idolize people for how much they've taken, not how much they've contributed. But what if we flipped that? What if we celebrated teachers the way we celebrate tech CEOs? What if nurses and public servants were held up as heroes, not just in crises, but every day? This isn't about shaming ambition. It's about reminding ourselves that ambition alone is not virtue. We need to start measuring progress by how the least among us are doing, not by how high the stock market climbs. That means making room in our culture for values like empathy, solidarity, and justice, not just as buzzwords, but as standards. Think about what we teach our kids, what we reward in school, what kind of success stories we hand them. We push STEM, entrepreneurship, competition, and that's great. But what about civic literacy? What about ethical leadership? What about public service? We tell young people to follow their dreams, but what if we also taught them to follow duty? We need local journalism, not just for gossip and clickbait, but for actual civic engagement, coverage of school boards, city councils, zoning laws. The unglamorous stuff that keeps democracy alive. And we need to make that coverage matter. Right now, most people feel like local politics is irrelevant. But the truth is, that's where your voice still has power. That's where change is still possible. But it only works if people show up. And we need people to show up together. Because here's another one of Aristotle's insights. Democracy cannot survive if it becomes a spectator sport. It requires participation. It requires practice. This isn't just about electing the right leaders. It's about building systems and cultures that keep power in check, regardless of who's in charge. And that's the most chilling part of Aristotle's analysis. He didn't think these cycles of decay were random. He believed they were natural. Societies rise. They prosper. They get soft. They get corrupt. And they fall. Hard times create strong people. Strong people create good times. Good times create weak people. Weak people create hard times. Sound familiar? We're living through what you might call civilizational amnesia. We've forgotten what previous generations learned through blood, sacrifice, and struggle. We've forgotten that rights aren't granted, they're fought for. That power doesn't give itself up. That justice isn't automatic, it's earned. Every generation thinks they've cracked the code, that they're too smart to repeat the mistakes of history. But here's what Aristotle knew that we've forgotten. Human nature doesn't change. Only the tools do. The oligarchs of old used armies. The ones today use algorithms. The old empires had borders. These ones have brands. The old tyrants ruled through fear. These ones rule through convenience. And they've made the prison so comfortable, so seamless, that we don't even notice the bars. In fact, we decorate them. We defend them. But, and this is important, we're not powerless. Awareness can slow the cycle. Education can delay decay. Organization can check power. We can still choose to care, to show up, to fight for something better. And that begins with refusing to accept that oligarchy is natural, inevitable, or permanent. Because it's not. Every right we have, every freedom we enjoy, exists because someone before us said, enough. They saw what we see now, and they acted. So the real question isn't what went wrong. We know what went wrong. The question is, what are we going to do about it? So here we are, 2,400 years after Aristotle warned us, and we're staring into the same mirror he held up to his own world. What do we see? We see a handful of individuals with more wealth than entire countries. We see corporations that don't just follow the law, they write it. We see housing, education, healthcare, all basic needs, turned into luxury goods. We see democracy hollowed out, reduced to voting between pre-selected options every few years, while the real decisions get made in boardrooms and backrooms. And yet, there's still a flicker of something Aristotle would have recognized: the possibility of awakening. Because here's the truth: you're still here. You're still watching, listening, thinking. That means some part of you refuses to accept that this is just the way things have to be, and that matters. Because the road forward doesn't start with burning it all down. It starts with building something better. Not as individuals trying to scream over the noise, but as communities choosing to fight smarter. So what does that look like? It means supporting organizations, not just influencers. Fight for campaign finance reform, for antitrust laws, for workers' rights. These aren't buzzwords, they're tools. It means showing up to local meetings. Yes, the boring ones. Because that's where the rot starts, and where it can be reversed. It means educating yourself on how power actually works, and then helping others do the same. If you've made it this far into the video, chances are you already know more than most. Don't waste it. And most importantly, it means refusing to let anyone tell you that change is impossible. Remember this: oligarchy only thrives when people stop believing their voice matters, when they give up, when they tune out. But every right we have today, every shred of justice, was won by people who didn't give up. People who risked ridicule, arrest, even death to shift the world 1 inch at a time. Aristotle wouldn't call our current system a democracy. He'd call it exactly what it is: oligarchy with democratic characteristics. Rule by the few, disguised as rule by the many. The real question is, now that you see it, what will you do? Because here's the part that gets buried in textbooks: freedom isn't a gift. It's a practice. Democracy isn't a system. It's a commitment. Justice isn't a law. It's a choice we make every single day. And if something clicked for you today, if this shook something loose, then chances are someone in your life needs to hear it too. Not because this video has all the answers, it doesn't, but because sometimes the first step to real change is just knowing you're not crazy for seeing what you see. So share it. Talk about it. Question what you're told. Ask who benefits. Look at who's protected. Follow the power. Connect the dots. The mirror is in your hands now. The question is, what do you see when you look around with these new eyes? And more importantly, what are you willing to do about it?